How's it, everyone? This is Lolcohol with my updated guide for the 3.24 Poison Blade Vortex Pathfinder. This build performed really well the last two leagues. There's been a few changes, nothing too significant, so don't worry. This video is going to go over all those changes. If you want the full video guide, it's going to be linked in the description. That's the one from 3.23. But for those of you who haven't played this build, just a quick rundown. This is a very well-rounded, tanky mapper. It excels at content like Expedition. It's not a bosser per se, but you will not struggle doing any of the pinnacle bosses that you need to. This guide also includes a very detailed POB. It also has a very detailed spreadsheet explaining the leveling process and different parts of the gear and build. It also has a full campaign playthrough video where I go from Act 1 till the end of Act 10. You can play along with that if you want. And then there's also a very active Discord community for the build. So if you want to join in on that, check the link in the description. There's a channel specifically for this build. You can go in there, ask questions about the build if you need to. All right, let's go over the changes to the build. Like I said, there are not too many. Some of them are impactful, some of them aren't. I've also updated the POB to be a little bit more condensed. So you can see here are the leveling trees and the map trees, and then the endgame progression into Cold Iron Point and the extreme endgame version. But the changes to the build. So first thing is, since Rebirth, we are no longer using this flask. Unholy Might has changed. So what it does now is it converts 100% of physical to chaos damage and then grants a 25% chance to apply Wither on hit. This doesn't actually do anything for us anymore. Previously, what Unholy Might did was it granted us 30% of Fizz as extra chaos, which was big damage. So losing this, pretty disappointing. However, early on, once we swap into BV, which is around Act 9, we can use an Extractor Mantis. This is a very common and cheap amulet, and it actually retains the old Unholy Might, which is 10% chance to gain Chaotic Might for 10 seconds on kill. This functions the same way Unholy Might used to do. 30% of his extra chaos. However, it does have the downside of granting these things to enemies, but Onslaught, Chaotic Might, Recover Life on Kill, it's actually a really good amulet that I overlooked before. So I think this is a good one early on before we get a +1 amulet. It's a good option. However, later on, I don't believe there are any other sources of this Chaotic Might, so we're just losing that 30% Fizz extra chaos, which is a bit sad. Next, and probably the saddest change to the build, is that we can no longer place Withering Step on left click because they've removed instant cast skills being able to be instantly cast automatically by placing on your left click. So what we need to do is we need to use automation support. This build is already fairly button heavy, so having to push another button on top of everything else, just it's too much. So we do need to use automation support. The bad news is that this build, like pretty much all other builds right now, is pretty socket starved already. So we do have to drop a gem, and I was looking at it and thinking, what can we remove? The only thing I can think of is this increased AoE with Plague Bearer. It's like a quality of life loss. We are getting poison proliferation, which will propagate those poisons throughout packs, but this is a bit sad. This is the only thing that seemed really obvious to me. The only other option of a gem we could possibly remove is Inspiration on our Divine Blessing setup. This you can only get away with if you have enough energy shields. So we can actually see what the cost is. ES is 250, life 160. We take that off, it's about 338. So this actually might be a better option to remove the inspiration and then keep the increased AoE, but you're gonna have to remove one of these two gems, unfortunately. Bit lame, but I don't know. Maybe they'll revert it before League start, we'll see. And next, probably the only other major change to the build is with flasks. This build uses a Ruby flask, and the change to this is, previously, Ruby Flask, the implicit, granted 50% to fire resistance and 20% less fire damage taken. However, now it's 40% to fire resistance and 5% to maximum fire resistance. I'm not 100% sure exactly the EHP comparison still actually really good for us, because now we can sit at about 82% to 83%, maybe even 84% max fire res, which is really good, especially with Dawnbreaker. I need to math it out to see how much of a loss it is, but this is a softcore build. It's not like the difference between life and death. And next, the other probably biggest change and one I'm most disappointed about is the elemental resistance suffix on Flask. This has been just straight up cut in half, which means that we're going to have to use more of our suffixes to get more resistances. Previously, we could get a 100% uptime. You can see it there on the screen, 100% uptime on this Flask, which means that we could actually comfortably rely on this Flask to cap our resistances. Obviously, assuming we're not running a map with fewer Flask charges gained. However, we previously were using things like regenerate as a suffix because we really didn't need too many suffixes. So life regen suffixes, they're going to have to go as a luxury thing instead of just a staple of the build, meaning we're going to have less life regen. Also, early on, when you're on this budget version, you may need to still use Purity of Elements during early maps. Probably have to drop this determination initially if you just need to get those resistances pushed up. So early maps, sort of yellows and white maps, I think you can get away in softcore without running determination. Our Grace will be doing a fair amount of work, so not going to get hit. When you do get hit, might hurt a bit, but at least we do have a backup plan, and later on it's not too big a deal. I've also updated the build with this Cold Iron Point. This previously was in the build guide. I didn't actually fully recommend it. It was like an optional thing. However, I think now this is actually better. After playing this last league with the Cold Iron Point and the Astronauts, it actually feels awesome. So I highly recommend trying this version of the build. You don't need to use 2 Mings. This is extremely greedy. I actually want to change that. That's too greedy. Gross. Get it out of here. So 1 Mings, 1 of that, Astronauts. However, the thing with this version of the build is it is going to really strain your suffixes. You're going to need a lot of intelligence. I believe we need 188 intelligence and 159 strength and 300 dexterity. And this version of the build makes it a bit more of a stretch to meet all those requirements. So this is something we do later on. However, when you do make this change, it's well worth it. Another thing about this version of the build, Astronauts, this has energy shield, it doesn't have evasion rating, and this is relevant because of this mastery. 15% chance to suppress spell damage if equipped. Helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating. So on this version, we can look down here, we've got the Cold Iron Point. We have removed that, meaning that we are going to need to find another 15% suppression somewhere. And as you can see, we're using a lot of unique items on this build. So it's going to have to come from your boots and your helmet. So this, like I said, very much worth it, but it's not an easy swap that you're going to be able to do early on. However, that being said, this version of the build still feels great. Just remember, when you're doing your bosses, swap in the Cold Iron Point because we don't need to worry about that explode while doing bosses. But that's going to be it for this video. If you do want to find the full video build guide where I go over everything, that'll be linked in the description. Just bear in mind, keep these changes in mind because in that video, obviously, it was a different patch, so certain things were different. However, I have updated the POB. Follow the POB. You'll also find the spreadsheet, link to the Discord, all of the resources that are required in the description. And then tomorrow, or hopefully tomorrow, or at least early in the week, I will be releasing my League starter guide for Lightning Strike. It's a bit of a risky one, so if you're a new player, don't look forward to it. But to everyone else looking forward to it, it's coming, I promise. It'll be here soon. The ultimate League start bait build. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe. Catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Exile, you're making me nervous.